Repressed memory therapy experienced a boom in the 1980s and early 90s, especially here in the United States. See, therapists would use things like guided imagery and hypnosis and similar techniques to help clients recover memories, especially of things like childhood abuse. As these cases became more and more common, we started hearing about them in the news. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a professor of psychology and expert in misinformation, began to wonder, how accurate are these memories? So, in 1995, she conducted the now famous experiment where 24 participants were given a booklet. And in this booklet, there were 4 stories from their early childhood that had been provided by family members that were previously interviewed. The participants were asked to recall, how much do you remember about each of these childhood stories? Now, the one caveat was that one of the stories had been made up by the research team, specifically a story about the participant getting lost in a shopping mall at age 5, that they were frightened and lost, that they began to cry, and that they were finally rescued by an elderly stranger. And despite this story being entirely made up by the research team, a quarter of the participants in that study recalled specific details about the experience. Again, despite it never actually happening. See, by priming the participants with those 3 true stories, the researchers were able to then effectively add in the false memories with that 4th made-up story. Now, when she first published this study, skeptics were skeptical. And rightly so. After all, isn't getting lost in a mall a pretty common experience? Maybe 25% of your participants actually got lost in a mall and they were recalling a real event. So what would happen if the memory was more unique, more fantastical? And so researchers then tried to replicate her study. It's good research. And for example, Dr. Hyman at Western Washington University tried to implant a memory about how, as a child, the participants bumped into a bowl of punch at a wedding and spilled it all over the bride's parents. Others up in Canada tried to implant false memories of vicious animal attacks, of serious accidents, and in every single case, they got again roughly 25% of the participants to recall the false memories. Now, later studies continued this work, taking it even a step further. So, for example, in 2002, a study showed participants photoshopped images of themselves as kids in hot air balloons, and roughly half the participants developed false memories of the hot air balloon ride. They described how they felt in the balloon and even the sights they saw from up high. See, our memory is not only infallible, it is highly contextual. It is influenced by the experience of recall itself. See, in other words, unlike computers where we access some kind of memory save state, our memory is reconstructed on the fly in response to what is happening in the moment. It's why things like eyewitness testimony are always suspect, and why we have to avoid leading questions when we are interviewing people. And it's why things like repressed memory therapy have since been replaced with more valid approaches to treating trauma, things like EMDR or somatic experiencing. So let me know what you think. In fact, in the poll below, how many of you remember the color of the hot air balloon and the fact that it was blue rather than the red you might be imagining right now? Let me know in the poll before you go back to check.